Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And good whatever time of day if you're watching the replay. Tonight, I'm really happy to have Jenn Reese with us. Their new book, Puzzleheart, just came out last week. Last week, right?
Yes, yes.
And we're super excited to talk to them. And it looks like they have all three of the books in the back.
Hmm.
They are also the author of Every Bird a Prince and A Game of Fox and Squirrels. And A Game of Fox and Squirrels was an Oregon Book Award winner, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, I think that's right. And I believe it was nominated for something else too, right?
Yeah, it won the Oregon Spirit Book Award as well and was nominated for the Norton Nebula
Okay,
Award
that's the
and
one
a
I was trying to
yeah,
remember. Yeah, yeah.
Mythopoeic. Yeah.
Which is also very exciting. It was very cool. But Puzzle Heart is the most recent, just came out. They got to do a release day party at Powell's with Sonja Thomas, who we interviewed 2 weeks ago. So you can jump back a couple weeks and see her interview. But just really excited. We're having middle grade extravaganza this month. So
That's right.
um, I'm gonna ask Jenn the same question I pretty much start every interview with, is just tell us a little bit for those who haven't had a chance to interact with the book yet. Maybe just more like kind of the flap copy version of maybe
Sure.
the extended flap copy version without giving anything important away.
Okay. Well, the log line or whatever I would say is this is about a non-binary kid who faces off against their persnickety grandmother and a sentient puzzle house in an effort to solve their father's growing sadness. So it's got puzzles, a big house that actually gets its own point of view chapters, and some like family stuff that's being worked through through multiple generations.
Yeah, that is a that's a very succinct summary. I have some questions written down and I'm gonna ask them out of order, so you'll probably see me peering down, trying to figure out
Excellent.
what I'm asking next. But one of the first things I noticed as I was sitting down, I finally got to sit down with the book and actually like go through it and read parts of it, and this afternoon when I was working on questions, and one of the first things that struck me was the house. Not only is like there've been I've seen other books where the house is kind of a character or a presence, but you actually give the house like point of view chapters, which is not something I've seen very many people do. And I'm curious, what was the sort of thought process or creative process that led you to go from, oh, there's going to be a house in this book that's like super important or even sentient,
Sure.
to, oh no, this house needs to have like actual words
Right.
that it says
Right.
in the story.
I have two primary reasons for doing this with the house. The first is that it seemed like fun. So when I was writing, I just wanted to write some chapters from the house. I think in the first draft, those chapters didn't survive. One of them was just the house chapter, and it just said ha 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 ha, like the house was laughing, because it had done something, and it was pretty proud of that. But the bigger reason is that in this book, Perigi, who is the main character, is sort of they're trying to help their father through a period of sadness, and they're basically putting their own life on hold in an effort to help their father. Everything in their world is sort of wrapped around their father's struggle with sadness or depression or whatever. They don't usually say depression in the book, but that's most readers will probably
Yeah.
understand it. That's what it is. Um, so I wanted to have when I'm writing a story like this where I'm trying to work through a theme, usually for myself, I try to have other characters who have relationships to that theme that are different than the main characters. Um, so I'll have a character who doesn't care, like, who is reacting in a completely different way to a parent who's in a stressful situation or to another person whose happiness. The secondary character in this is Lily, who is another guest of the house. And Lily's mother is out doing dangerous work. She's trying to rescue hikers lost on this snowy mountain. And Lily is okay with that, even though it stresses her out. She's okay with that. So that provides sort of a different lens, a different way to approach this, like how much of our parents do we need to worry about, basically.
Yeah.
And that, so the house is another version of that. The house is sort of like, what if Perigee continues on the path that they're on already, where they're just sort of putting everything towards their father's happiness. And so the house is doing that sort of same thing, but with the persnickety grandmother. And the house is actually going to the point, and I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, where it's sort of tearing itself apart at times in order to try to make her happy or do what it thinks she might want. So yeah, so I think a lot of the characters reflect and reflect and refract the theme
Yeah.
in different ways, which is one of my favorite ways to write books that have sort of like a theme on the side. But then going back to the fact that it's just fun to write those chapters, I really enjoyed
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Was there a particular house that was inspiring, or like did you have images of houses that you used, or even just a mental image of a house that you use when you're writing these chapters?
I didn't at first. I mean, I have a mental image of my house, which is a little bit like the Haunted Mansion in Disney, but also bigger on the inside than it is on the outside type of place. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
like three different areas that are, the mountain, one whole set of hallways is the mountains, and one is the forest, and one is the underwater area. So, I'm hoping that it feels like it's just much bigger on the inside than you would expect. Lots of hidden passages and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, extending stairways. But I would have to say that the biggest influence was probably one of my favorite books of all time, which is Ellen Raskin's The Westing Game, which is an older book that won the Newbery like in the 70s, I think. And I reread it all the time. I still think it's a brilliant book. And it has a big mystery, and it centers around this Westing house, which is just this mysterious house. And there's all sorts of riddles and puzzles. And basically, it's one of my goals in life to write something that resonates, with people or with myself, like as much as the Westing Game does. But, I don't think I've gotten there yet. I'm just basically gonna, it's gonna be a life mission. I'm always gonna be trying to reach this unattainable, like, grail that is the Westing Game in my mind. But there was a couple reviews that did compare Puzzleheart to the Westing Game, and so that
That's
is like,
exciting.
yeah, that is
That's
like a
good.
huge, like, check mark on my bingo card. I
That's
think
neat.
one of them said the Westing Game and the Winchester Mystery House like together for. I've never been to
Yeah.
the Winchester Mystery House, but I guess a
Well,
lot
is
of
that the
people.
one in California?
Yes, yeah, that
That's
has
what it
all
made
of
me
the
think of.
rooms.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. I was like, isn't there a house in California that's kind of like this?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and they
that's
just keep
awesome.
building on to that and building on, and it's very strange.
Yeah,
But I've never
yeah.
been there, so I
Yeah,
can't.
no, I haven't either, but I've heard stories about it, and that's what it made me think
Yeah,
of.
I'm also just really attracted to books that take place in sort of a tiny area that people can't leave.
Yeah, yeah,
Closed room stories type of thing. The Perigee and their dad arrive there in chapter one, racing a freak snowstorm that's
yeah,
happening in the spring, and so they're trapped in this snowstorm in the house for the whole book. And I always love stuff like that. I just
yeah,
love it,
yeah,
especially
yeah,
in this day and age where we feel so connected all the time, and we can basically, go online and do anything or see anything, get in our cars and drive anywhere.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of a fun thing to suddenly not be able to do any of
yeah.
that.
Very Agatha Christie.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah. Did you create so back up, I guess I should back up a little bit, and you call it Puzzle Heart and we talk about puzzles. So I guess maybe talk about that aspect of the book a little bit, like where, because this question should come after we talk about what's there.
Sure.
Um, what led you to the puzzle aspect of the book?
That was one of the primary motivators to write the book, is that I basically write where my passions are. I mean, a game of Fox and Squirrels has a card game in it, and I wanted
Yeah,
that
yeah,
partly began because I wanted to write a card game. I wanted to like just play around with game design a little bit.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I love puzzles, and so I thought, okay, well, let me just do, let me put a bunch of puzzles in a book. And it was a little bit harder than I thought to do puzzles,
yeah,
especially
yeah,
ones you can describe, you know.
yeah, yeah.
So
What was the
that part was
hardest
challenging.
aspect of that? Because, like I think of like I was trying to think of no, I'm gonna blank out, but there's a picture book written probably 15 years ago or so that has a puzzle at the heart of it.
Mm.
I think it's the same guy that did Animalia, and like The 11th Hour was the name of the picture
Ah,
book. And
okay.
and I always think about how like there's a lot of complexity when you're working a puzzle into a story and they have to weave together in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
What was the hardest aspect of that?
Um, the writing, I have a bunch of individual puzzles that the kids solve or try to solve during
Mhm.
the course of the story. And coming up with those was mostly just sort of fun. It was just like, what
Yeah,
is a wild thing I could put in this area or something like that. But I also wanted an overarching puzzle that needed to be solved, like in the Westing game. In the Westing game, there is who committed this murder is kind of this question that drives the whole book. And so I wanted something similar to that. And that was tricky. It's tricky to make a puzzle just the right amount of difficulty as well. Like you need some people to be able to solve it. It's going to be too easy for some people, too hard for some
yeah,
people. You're
yeah,
trying to find that sort of like bell curve in the middle where most
yeah,
people with a little effort can figure it out or can play along at least. So
yeah.
I think that part was a little tough. I actually had Curtis Chen, who you've had on your channel before. He's
Yeah.
a local author to the store. Curtis is amazing at puzzles, and so I begged him to read the book in the draft form and take a look at the puzzles in specific. And then he told me my main big puzzle was too easy. So I said, okay. So I went back and I made some changes to it and adjusted it based on his recommendations. So that was really helpful. Getting some fresh eyes when you're trying to design
Yeah,
puzzles
yeah.
helps. I also drew pictures for the book. So I don't know, um, trying to,
Yay. I got
yeah,
to see a few, but yeah, show us, you can show a couple of them.
let me see. Yeah, here's the doorbell at the front
Yeah,
of the
I love
house
that one.
where you can enter passwords and different chimes sound and things like that. So when I was writing the book, I was sketching these in and I said, here's, an artist will want to do something like this in this spot. Um, and so I did all of these different places like that. And my editor came back and said, okay, then go ahead and do the art for those. So I said, what?
Well, that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
A new thing to have as a challenge. That's
Yeah,
good.
I love art and I've always considered myself an amateur artist. I think because of fear. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so I said, don't you want to get a professional? And but I didn't argue too much because as much as it's been a dream of mine to have illustrations in a book, drawing my own illustrations is even a bigger dream. Like that just made me super
yeah.
happy. And they're mostly spot illustrations, so I never had to draw any people, thank goodness. But yeah, and I also got to draw like the background wood of the house chapters and
Oh,
stuff like
fun.
that.
What
Um,
was your favorite? Do you have a favorite illustration that you drew?
I do. Um, I know. Ugh. I found it the other day and I should have marked it because yeah. So yeah, it is a near the end of the book and it is a dangerous section. Okay, here it is. Let me see. I was kind of hoping it would be huge, but it is a spinning column of knives.
That seems a little unnerving.
Yes, things get a little bit wild near the end of this book, and the house gets a little bit desperate and sort of pulls out all
Yeah,
the stops. So I really enjoyed drawing the spinning knife wall.
that's
That was
hilarious.
great.
I love it. What? role, I mean, you've touched on this a little bit because we talked about the house being a character that also, like has things that it wants and has its own things that it's processing through. But
Hmm.
what was there some kind of like underlying theme that you wanted to communicate through the house as a character? Um, I just thought I'm trying to think about how to ask this or let you answer it without giving too much away, but
Hmm.
like it was interesting to me that the house was kind of a proxy for a lot of the feelings
Hmm.
that maybe some of the characters you would think should be feeling and weren't, or maybe that just wasn't being communicated that they were feeling or whatever.
Hmm.
I thought that that was really interesting, and I was curious whether that was kind of a conscious choice for the house to kind of be mirroring some of this, or whether, because sometimes when you're writing, you are thinking, oh, I want this to be communicated. And sometimes I think when we're writing, it just happens. So I'm
Hmm.
always curious, like, at what places do writers say, yeah, I want this to be happening, and at what places it just kind of the flow of what comes out.
Um, I think I'm a pretty deliberate writer. So for me, it's at least in subsequent drafts. So a lot of times the first draft, I'll write whatever sort of feels like I want to at the moment. But the house, for example, I ended up rewriting a lot of the house's chapters in the second draft because I wanted them to be more specific or do more specific things or reflect,
Yeah,
certain
yeah,
emotions a little bit better. The house is, has been around for many decades, but it still feels like emotionally a child. So it's still
yeah,
reacting, much like our main character is, throwing tantrums and, reacting sort of jealously or lashing out and things like that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I do think it does reflect it does reflect a more childlike mindset, similar to the other characters.
Yeah, yeah. I thought I guess as an adult reader reading, I felt like the house, there's a lot of grief in the story. And I
Hmm.
felt like the house like was kind of holding on to a lot of that in its characterization, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was
I
interesting.
I can tell any viewers that the persnickety grandmother who they come to stay with. She and her husband are the people that built this house, which is called Eklund's Puzzle House. They intended to open it as sort of like a escape room slash B&B long before escape rooms were a thing. But her husband, Perigy's grandfather, died in a car accident before this could happen. And the grandmother never opened the B&B, and shortly after that she sent her son, the main character's father, to live with relatives. And so she has never really confronted or moved past this tragic event in her history, and this tragic event has sort of shaped this family across the generations based on
Yeah,
its power. And so everyone in this little closed house situation is dealing with this loss of the grandfather in a different way.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So that was really kind of fun to write and interesting for me to write.
Yeah, yeah. I One of the things I was thinking of as I was reading is, and you did allude to this a little bit about when you're talking about like first draft is for this, and then later on you're being more deliberate. And I think one of the things that I just always find striking in your work, no matter what the main, whatever there's so many like different like background stories that you have set your characters in, but there's always this really interesting balance of light and dark in everything that you write. And so in this book, I don't think it's too giving away to say there are cats. Very cute
Yes.
cat. And the puzzles, right? I mean, puzzles are just fun.
Hmm.
Um, how in your writing process, where is the like the real fine balancing that you do, like where that wasn't articulated well.
I think I
Like
know what you mean.
how do you, where in the process do you kind of go, okay, now I need to make sure that they're somewhat in balance and that it's not too sad, but it's also not, that that's coming through. The things I want to say are
Sure,
coming through.
sure. Um, I don't think when I'm writing, I think of it like that, like I have to balance out. I think what
Okay.
I'm trying for, and this is kind of, um, I'm trying for truth, right? Truth,
Yeah.
life, to me is like that. It's depression, it's bad things, it's funny things, and they often happen all at the same time. A terrible tragedy is happening, and yet you're laughing because your cat just did something funny.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a little bit of just trying to keep it honest to life, which is
Yeah.
just such a mix of emotions all the time.
All the
And
time.
all the time. Like so
Yeah.
much is going
Yeah.
on. Yeah. So yeah, I think there is joy, at the same time there's sadness. And so that's just I feel like that's just life. And I want to be
Yeah.
true to that when I'm writing. I have no interest in writing something that's just really depressing all the way through. But I also think I don't want to write anything that's just happy all the way through. I mean, one, that's
Yeah.
not what stories are usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
But two, I'm generally writing for kids who grew up in situations like I might have experienced, or you know, kids who are dealing with things that their
Yeah.
lives aren't
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
sparkle ponies or whatever. That's um, so I'm always sort of keeping that kid is a little bit more my reader than someone who's never experienced those things. Although I'm trying to make it accessible for kids who, you know, are just seeing through the window at,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
depression or anything like that.
Right. Right. Do you think that um, willingness in middle grade books to kind of tackle both sides of life has changed and evolved over time?
I don't. I mean, I think a lot of the books I read growing up had a lot of serious stuff in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they were much more likely to kill a dog, in a book when I was growing up, actually. You know, like many books had that. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of survival stories and things. I think, but what we have now, which we should always have had, we can get more queer stories and
Yeah.
more stories
Yeah.
about neurodivergence and about mental health issues and things like that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
just in general conversation, those things are now more talked about and more prevalent. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's exciting for me. I'm very happy that we're doing that. Every Bird a Prince, which is the book that came out in 2022, is a book where a character is figuring out that they are aromantic or asexual, just part of the ace spectrum. And that is not a thing I have ever seen in a book for
Yeah.
that age group, like
Right.
when I was
Right.
growing up, for
Yeah.
sure.
For sure not. Yeah. I
And
was trying to
nowadays,
think if I've seen it. I'm starting to see it more in YA, but I'm still not seeing it a whole lot in middle grade.
I'm seeing it a little bit in middle grade.
So,
I'm definitely not the first book in middle
right,
grade that
right.
has done it, but I may be one of the first that's using the words
Yeah. Yeah.
aromantic and asexual, because I think, the first step is that we sort of push open the door a little bit and we
Yeah.
start bringing in the concepts. And then, then it's a little bit longer after that before we feel comfortable with the labels. Um,
Right. Right.
so, yeah, I don't remember
Yeah,
where I was going with this,
I'm
but
curious if this is gonna make me go like poke back into like kid lit history, but because I think of stuff that was in my library way back in the day. We won't say
mhm.
how long ago that was. But I think of like the Bobbsey twins and the Happy Hollisters, and like there was a period where there really wasn't a ton of everything was kind of
Sure.
light and fluffy and
Hmm.
not necessarily so much in like the history stories, but
Yeah.
anything that was just sort of contemporary fiction was mostly
Yeah. Yeah. I
um
think I read a lot
but
of
I think there
Newbery.
was a switch
Mm.
at some point where the Newbery stuff, I think, is always stuff that merited the Newbery has always, we've joked around about sometimes it's like the Newbery
Yeah.
goes and picks is the most depressing book. And I
Yeah.
don't think that's so much true anymore, but there was a time, like a chunk of time a few years ago where it was like, oh, I don't want to, if it won the Newbery, I don't want to read it because it's going to be really good, but it's going to be really depressing. But, so it's not that they were never there, but I guess I think that, probably late 80s, 90s, like then we started to see a much more
Hmm.
diverse range of experiences and characters, and that middle school kids could handle happy and sad in the same
Hmm.
place, I
Hmm.
guess, instead of just all being like, this is going to be a funny book or this is going to be a serious book. I think
Yeah.
there's more of a
I mean,
life is both.
yes.
So,
Yeah. I do find that the kids seem perfectly able to
yes,
handle
absolutely.
like harder topics. It's the
Yeah,
adults that I'm
yeah,
finding that I get the most pushback from,
yeah,
who are like, oh,
yeah,
this book's, if I say, in Game of Fox and Squirrels deals with the effects of child abuse, right? I still
yeah,
think it's a good story. It's not like
yeah, yeah,
very, totally sad or anything, but no kid has ever told me it was too much. It's only
yeah,
parents who don't want to deal with it. Um, but for many kids, that's a reality.
right,
It's
right.
not too dark.
Well,
Kids are
and what I
just,
think is
yeah.
really interesting is like, because um, I'll get to this one the whole way through too. But I have, the other two I have read the whole way through, and I know Game of Fox and Squirrels, like that never feels like it's the boss of the story. You know what I mean? I think it's like it's there. It's a huge part of the story is this kid working through this horrible thing that's happened. But I think that sometimes parents miss that, like it's still a story. It's still fun. There's still a plot. You still want to know what happens. It's
Hmm.
not just depressing, 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 the whole
Yeah,
way through.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
And there's definitely ways, to do that more and less successfully. I
yeah,
think there can be some heavy-handed books that I mean, I'm one of those adults who has trouble reading things that are really depressing. And there's a
yeah, yeah.
couple middle grade books I've had to stop reading because they're kind of a little bit
Yeah, they're
triggering,
really hard. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, but but yeah, kids, I'm finding, for the most part, every kid is different, right?
yeah,
Every reader is different. Don't seem to They seem to be very resilient and able to handle a lot of different things in
yeah.
middle grade. Um, yeah.
Well, the other thing that fascinates me, I saw this in my own kids, and I suspect that it's not unique, is that kids are very good at self-censoring.
Hmm.
Like they know what they're ready for and what they're not ready for. And, my kids would be like, I don't, they get so far in a book and go, yeah, I don't want to read this. This is not
Hmm.
for me. And
Yeah.
maybe they'd come back to it a couple years later and then they would be ready, or maybe they never would.
Hmm.
So I never felt like I had to like loom over them and go, oh, that book's too old for you, or you're not ready for that, because they were pretty good about saying, yeah, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think
yeah,
it's a great skill that kids develop and that we should encourage, which is to leave a book, if you're not enjoying it or you
yeah,
don't want to,
yes,
unless
exactly.
it's for a
Yeah.
school assignment. I don't want to get involved in that, but
Yeah,
um,
although sometimes I think that maybe there should be a little more leeway there too, but
there
that's a
probably
whole
should
other
be.
discussion.
Yeah, but I'm going to leave that up to
But
the professionals.
yeah, exactly. That's
But
not my area. So
Yeah, yeah, but I think self-censor, I mean, such an important skill. I think that it took me a really long time to get to the point where I was willing to abandon a book that was, too much for me, even as an adult or
yeah,
whatever. I
yeah,
wish I had that skill, as a young person. So, but yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think there's, good books have levels that you can read. You can read them
yes,
as a kid
yeah,
and get one story, read them again later and get another. Like Ursula K. Le Guin is like that for me. You can read the A Wizard of Ursia as a kid, and it's just this adventure with some dragons and things
yes,
like that.
yeah,
And then you can go back later and find these just layers, just
yeah,
much more to the story. And I
yeah,
just love books like that. I love the revisiting them through the lens of a couple of years can really make a big difference.
yeah. What do you think? I mean, we've kind of been dancing around this, the answer to this whole time, but what do you think the role of these books are? Like any like fiction in general for middle grade. I mean, for anybody, but especially
Yeah.
for middle grade. What do you think fiction can do that maybe other books can't, I guess?
I mean, that's a really big question.
Yes, yeah, it is. And you can take it wherever you want
Yeah,
to.
yeah. I mean, for me, I'll just answer in terms of I write books that have a speculative element, like a little bit of fantasy or a little bit of
Yeah,
science fiction in them. And for me, what that does is gives us a distance, a little bit of distance from our lives so that we can more clearly look back and see. I kind of liken it to when you go on vacation. Sometimes when you go on vacation and you're living in a hotel for a week or just outside of your own house, you finally start to recognize things you see about your own life that you didn't see when you were actually living in it,
yeah,
that you really don't see without the distance. And I think science fiction and fantasy can be a little bit like that. Um, you know, the house, for example, the house in Puzzleheart, it's a sentient house, but it's actually a person, right? It is
yeah,
dealing with a lot of the same things that a kid might be dealing with,
yeah,
but it is more obvious there. It's easier to
yeah,
see them when it's a house than when it's a kid, because a kid is a much more complicated thing. So sometimes
yeah,
these
yeah,
this little step away helps us see things in a new way or a clearer way than we would get normally. So that's one of the roles I think of science fiction and fantasy. I think that's, one reason I always want to write them. I've tried to write things without magic or
yeah,
sight,
yeah.
stuck, and I can't do it. So um
What, so you have these three novels, and they each have their own piece of, some kind of fantastical element or fantasy element. What, do those elements usually come first when you're figuring out a new story? Or, like, I can't remember, did you decide you wanted a book about puzzles first with this one? Or did you already like, I want to, like a puzzle house? Like, or did the sort of struggles that the characters are going to go through come first in your mind, and then you're like putting them in a place?
um it's kind of different with all of them. In the case of Puzzle Heart and A Game of Fox and Squirrels, I had these two disparate things. I had sort of a theme I wanted to work through, and then I also had a thing I just thought would be really fun to write. So, card games and making up card games and the characters come to life for Fox and Squirrels. And then I thought about marrying it to the story I had about talking about what it's like after, you leave a house that there's been an abuse in, sort of dealing with the chronic uh, post-traumatic stress disorder type of thing.
Yeah,
So yeah, I thought about putting them together, and that's really when that story came alive for me, because I wanted something to mitigate the heaviness of the
yeah,
PT,
yeah,
of that side of it. And, a game is a good way to mitigate that. And then, but that's also a good way to add some type of something profound to a
yeah,
game.
yeah,
So
yeah,
in Puzzle Heart, I did just want to write a puzzle house. Like, I didn't know it was going to be sentient at first, but I
yeah,
knew I wanted to do something like that. I had this, and I knew I wanted to talk about this sort of what we do for other people's happiness, like how much we let
yeah,
other people's
yeah,
happiness affect our own type of thing. So I had this one line for that book that I just had written in my notebook that said something like, puzzles can be solved, but people can't. Um, because yeah, the main character is just sort of like trying to fix their
yeah,
father,
yeah,
in
yeah,
the same way you might solve a crossword puzzle or a riddle or something like
yeah,
that. Like, if
yeah,
I find the solution to this, I will
yeah.
fix it. I will fix it all.
Well, and I
And
just thought that that's the piece of it that I think is so poignant, is like it doesn't matter what age you are, like anywhere from middle grade on up, you have probably encountered a situation where you have tried to make somebody else feel better to the potentially to the detriment of yourself.
mhm.
And So that I think that that really resonates um, with everybody. I think that's honestly for me the beauty of going back and reading middle grade and YA and why I love it so much is that you can see what, you can look at what's going on and what oh, I guess it's just a different person being able to come into it as an adult and see, oh, look at that. The house is throwing a tantrum.
Mhm.
Just like you probably wish you could, but you can't anymore because you're not supposed to do that. So, um, I love approaching these kids' books as an adult and coming in and saying, "Oh, look what's going on here, and this is really interesting and it's fun." So,
Yeah. I mean, I
what do
love,
you?
go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead and finish what you were going to say.
I just gonna say I love writing for kids. I don't um I don't sit down and think, what do kids need to learn from this
Yeah,
book?
yeah,
I usually sit down and think, what do I want to talk about my experience, or what do I want to work through, or what do I want to explore for me? And I think that's, that helps, I hope, keep them from becoming feeling like lectures in any way, because
yeah,
I'm really
yeah,
just trying to figure stuff out for myself by sort of exploring it while I write. Um, because I do feel like kids are people, right? They're not a
yeah,
separate entity. They're
yeah,
me,
yeah,
me just with some fewer years. They're
yeah,
very, very smart. They're very, you know, they really can pick up on a lot of things. I just had a school visit last week, and some of the smartest readers I've had of the books, adults or kids, were these kids talking
yeah,
about the metaphors in the books, and discussing how I wrote them and things like that. So I yeah.
yeah.
I think
That's
most middle grade writers know
yeah.
to respect their audience because these kids are so smart.
I think that that's what always amazes me the most about middle grade in particular is that these kids pick up on so much more than we give them credit for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And and yet they don't have the experience, right? They're 10,
Hmm.
11, 12, and so they're completely oblivious in some ways to certain things that an adult who's 30, 40, 50, or whatever is going to pick up on because they've gone through these experiences that these kids haven't had yet,
Hmm.
and yet they can be so profound at the same time, and
Hmm.
sometimes that the adults are kind of oblivious to because we've decided that those things weren't important or whatever. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so what was your favorite part to write in this book?
Um, my favorite part is almost always the ending, because I always know what that's going to be before I start writing. Or at least I have a general
Yeah,
idea of what it to do, in terms of the theme. I always say I'm kind of like a theme forward writer, in that that's often the driving force for me, is that basic concept I want to explore. So I have to know sort of where I want that to go. And it's a rule for myself to get through a novel, is that has to be a scene I really want to write, because it helps draw me through like the rest of the book,
yeah,
that I get to write that final scene as a reward. So for me, it's almost always the end. And then in this book, I also really enjoyed writing the house chapters.
yeah.
They're just they're all very, very short, but they're
Yeah,
just
yeah.
super
Yeah, I
fun.
was gonna say they're mostly just a couple pages, if that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
some of them are just like a paragraph, two paragraphs. They were just really fun to pepper in. Yeah.
And I have to ask, and I'm not gonna give any of the well, I will probably give some of them away in your answer, but the cats, the what was the inspiration for the names for the cats? I mean, she explains a couple, Lily explains at least a couple of them that I saw in the
Hmm.
particularly banana, which I thought was very hilarious.
Yes.
But were there other, or did you just try to pick the wackiest names that you could think of, or were there particular, like, this is why I want to name these cats these crazy names?
Well, so in the book, Perigy's friend, the other girl who is staying there, she has a mother kitten who has just given birth to a litter of a mother cat who's given birth to a litter of 5 kittens. One of the kittens is named Banana Pants, and this kitten is very like aggressively smart and always gets into everything. Uh, and I name it Banana Pants because that is a thing one of my friends says all the time. Author Tina Connolly always says
Yes.
something
Yes.
is Banana Pants, and I thought that would be a great name for a kitten.
That's very cute. Well, I
Yeah.
liked her Lily's explanation that he always is like underfoot making us trip like a banana. So I was
Yes.
like, that was pretty cute.
Yes. Yes. And the mother cat is named Tombstone because Lily is a little bit obsessed with death and the macabre right now because she's spending a lot of time thinking about what mortality is. That's just her journey. It's a separate
Yeah,
journey from
yeah.
Paragees. And I don't think I actually named the other
The other
kittens.
kittens. Okay. I hadn't gotten far enough, like I did the skim through to
Oh, no,
select
that's fine. I just remember
ideas to talk
because,
about. So I was like, oh, what are the rest of the names of the cats? So maybe that's a reader thing that you need to post on your website of
well,
like
actually,
let's name the rest of the cats.
on the at the my launch party last week, I did ask everyone there to
Oh,
name the
good.
other 4 kittens.
Oh,
And
good.
so I'll just say that I actually have 5 names for 4 kittens, but I have Spoon, Strawberry Shirt, which goes with Banana Pants, um, Whisker Snout, Oreo, and Blueberry. So those
Oh,
are all
they're good.
very cute names. So I'll have
Uh,
to knock one of those out for the official names, but I did tell
there you
them that
go.
those would be
Yeah.
the kittens' other names.
That's
And yeah, I just wanted to have add more chaos, right?
yes.
There's,
Yes.
kittens are just chaos.
Yeah. Anytime you want to just like let your story kind of go a little bit sideways, you just put a cat in it and it's all
Yeah,
good.
that's right.
I don't think the dog has a different role in the story, I think, but
Yeah. I have
cats are
not put a
different.
dog in a story yet, because I mean, I had one growing up, but I haven't had one as an adult, and I feel like I wouldn't be able to do it
Yeah,
justice.
yeah. I think dogs just have different energy.
And
They have
yeah,
important roles in stories to play for sure, but they bring a different energy. Cats are just like you never know what they're gonna
yeah.
do. So
And dogs vary so greatly by breed and
yes,
their,
that's
their
true too.
makeup, their personalities are, yeah, very different. Whereas most cat lovers understand some commonalities amongst all cats,
Yes, exactly. That is true. So I will ask what's next in your journey that you know of that's like you can talk about.
Sure. It hasn't been officially announced yet, but I did sell my first picture book last year.
Yay.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. I've already seen we have
I
just this fantastic illustrator on board, and I've seen the sketches already. Absolutely love them. And so hopefully that will be coming out next fall, fall 2025. Um,
okay.
so yeah, I'm very excited. There's a very long time with picture books because the illustrator has to do so much work. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, so that's going to be out with Green Willow Books, which is a
Oh,
division of
that's so
Harper.
exciting.
Yeah, so I'm very, very excited about that. It's really fun to work on that. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very different picture books are such a different animal than novels.
they are, they are. I mean, the
So
first draft
interesting.
of that, which I sent in, was 370 words. So very
Yep, that
different.
sounds about right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's sometimes, I mean, I know that I often counter this both as a writer and a bookseller of the sort of general feeling that picture books are easier.
Mm.
And I would have to say that in my experience, which is somewhat limited because I kind of gave up of the picture book world relatively quickly because I was like, this is not easy. This is very hard. But so what was the most interesting? I mean, there's some obvious ones like word count, page count, that kind of thing. But when it comes to storytelling, what was the most interesting or compelling difference between telling a story that's so few pages and so few words versus writing a novel?
Yeah, it's so different. I do a lot of flash fiction short stories, which are stories generally like under 1,000 words.
Yeah.
I've always loved writing them. I find them to be just super fun. I usually try to do something experimental. for me, those are a little bit closer to sort of prose poems at times, or just, style experiments or one concept. So usually they have a limited cast or in a limited setting in a limited time
Yeah.
frame. They're not vignettes because they do have like an arc to them or a story, but they're closer to that than they are to a
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah.
And short stories, or the picture book is much more like that than it is like
Yeah.
writing a
Yeah.
novel. It's definitely more of closer to poetry, I think, or um, yeah, something, or to songwriting, something that's
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
use imagery. And what's interesting for me is also just the idea that it's a collaborative art form,
Yes. Yeah.
in that, I wrote a couple before I found one that I wanted to work on. And it was just interesting to me, like all the description I would normally put in, I would have to just take
Yeah.
out again because it's not
Yeah.
my job to do that
Yeah.
in this format. It's the artist. The artist, brings so much to what this
Yeah.
is. And the editor does as well. Because I didn't even put the page turns in. I put in sort of little breaks where I thought things would go, but I just left it open, and the editor and the illustrator, our work basically have decided where all the page, where the turns go and what
Yeah.
things are
Yeah.
spreads. So yeah, that's been fascinating. And I love it because, I'm a visual person. I like to do art and everything, but I'm not at the level that they are at. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just
I
amazing.
find the whole picture book process so fascinating
Hmm.
because you can't have one without the other. Like you can't have the words without the pictures and you can't have the pictures without the word. I mean, sometimes you can,
Yeah.
but and they're so intertwined to make it really good
Hmm.
and they both sort of complement and add to each other
Right, right. You
in
don't want,
such a fascinating way.
yeah, you
So
don't want either one to work without the other.
yeah, yeah,
You don't want anything to be doubled up. Like if you say, the hippopotamus is dancing right there, and then there's a hippopotamus dancing right there. That is
yeah,
not a good use
exactly,
of your time,
exactly. Yeah, you're sitting there going, okay, well, what do I need to add to this story that's not what what the illustrator's going to
Right.
show. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So yeah, sort of a different way of thinking. When I wrote the one that sold, I was thinking like, I want this to be something an illustrator can't wait to dive into. Like, I want to
Oh,
put enough in
that's
here
fun.
that, yeah, that
Yeah.
an illustrator is going to be like, oh yeah, let me at this. And that was one of the reasons the editor cited for wanting the project, was that
Yeah.
it seemed like it was going to attract a good illustrator because it looked so like there was so much for them to do.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say that actually is such a great way to approach a picture book
yeah.
that you want to make it so that there's so much open. And I think that interesting thing about that when I work with people who are newer to picture books is I think there's a point when you're in your journey, particularly with picture books, where you want to sort of exert control over, well, I want the pictures to look like this and I want this to be happening and whatever. And
Hmm.
I think it's kind of humbling in a way because
Yeah.
you're realizing that I'm contributing this piece, but that's not my, that unless you're an author illustrator, and then it's a little bit different journey.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
yeah, you're leaving you are trying to create something that somebody else is going to be super excited to also be working on.
Yes, yes. And I feels to me like, to use a baseball metaphor, like I'm doing I'm what is I can't even think of the right metaphor now. Like a softball pitch. I'm like basically tossing the ball as like lightly as I can, setting them up to hit a home run. That's kind of what I feel like my
Yeah.
job is.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah. Someone pointed out to me rightly that there are no kidlit awards for writing picture books. There's
Yeah.
only, the Caldecott for illustrating. And that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to me because it's a lot of work and they're
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
tremendous amount of the storytelling with their art. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
It's interesting though. That is an interesting observation because it is such a team though. I don't think that you could win a Caldecott if the words weren't also amazing. You know what I mean? I think it's just an interesting, but without the illustrations, the words wouldn't
Yeah.
be as amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an
I mean,
interesting
yeah.
thought.
I will not be upset if my illustrator wins a Caldecott.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
no.
but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I
Uh,
don't know. It also feels good to be part of a team
yeah.
after publishing a lot of books solo.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
admittedly, publishing is also a team. The
Yes. Yeah.
editors are critical and have, contribute so much to the success of the book. Um, but it's a different team. You
It's
know what
a
I mean?
different team. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
different kind of a team. Yeah, because there's no way I mean, no book is if you come out of the publishing process and you have done it solely by yourself, you probably haven't turned out as good of a book as you could have,
I mean,
honestly.
I think a
But
lot of indie publishers can do it, but that's one of the reasons
yeah,
why I want to stick with traditional publishing while I
yeah,
can, because I really appreciate what editors
yeah.
bring to the table.
Well, and the interesting observation from that is that the indie publishers who, I think of different people bringing indie published books into the store, and we will look at, we look at anything anybody brings. We don't bring it all in, but we will look at anybody. And what I find is the best indie published books are the people who have said, I need the expertise of other people in order to
Mhm,
make this the
mhm,
best book it can be. I mean, and invariably, those are always the ones that are
mhm.
really good. And most of the time, when people are just like, no, I wanted control over everything, those are the ones that I kind of go, yeah, okay, but maybe you needed to ask for help on some of this stuff. So I think that there really isn't I think it'd be a very unique and very rare author who could really do the whole package by themselves and turn out something that was really compelling. So
Mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
all
it
I know is that I could not. So
yes, no, I definitely couldn't either. Yeah. Somebody out there is probably could, but most of
Mhm.
us need a little help.
Yeah.
Well, have you read anything lately that you would recommend to other people? That's always the way I like to end so that we can cheer for your work and other people's work too.
Let me check I just happen to have my list of what I've
Oh,
read.
yay.
Um, yeah, unfortunately, I've read a lot of manuscripts this year, which are my
Yeah.
friends' books that have not
We
yet
don't
been
get to see
published.
them yet.
Yeah, I obviously loved all of Blackwood Takes Action,
Yes.
Sonja Thomas's book, because we just
Yeah.
did that event together, and that was a great book. And I have learned so much about beavers, and I am
I know.
spreading that knowledge to all people. So that's super fun. Um, yeah, I'm just like, so I read so many things that are not coming out yet. I actually finally read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I can't believe it's taken me as long to read that. It's I don't know if you've heard of those or if you read the Murderbot
I know
books.
Martha Wells, but I don't think I've heard of that particular one.
It's the first book in her Murderbot series, which has
Okay,
just been
okay,
like the one that's just been they're making a TV show out of.
okay. And I probably what's happened is I've seen some of the later ones come through the store and
Exactly, yeah. So I finally started with the first one. It was very entertaining. Uh, yeah, I'm just like, which of these things have come out
can
yet?
I actually talk about?
I
Yeah.
know, I know. There's a book coming out by Pete Hautman, which is called Answers to Dog. And that's I think that's coming out this fall and it's a middle grade. And that is not speculative, but it was really good. It was one of those books that's a slim book and every word felt purposeful in it.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it just felt like, okay, this is a person, I feel like there's been care made on every sentence of this book.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
really good book about a boy, just trying to figure some things out and a stray dog that sort of tries to adopt him. Uh,
Aw.
so yeah,
Good dog.
yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the recommendations. I always put those in the description of the video so that
Oh, great.
people can go look those up and find your book and then find other stuff too. So,
Excellent.
well, thank you. I don't see any questions. I've been keeping an eye on it.
Okay.
So I just want to say thank you for being here tonight. Let everybody know that we will be back next week with Ruby McConnell. Um, and I'm totally banking on the name of her book, but I will be posting the announcement tomorrow. So look, I am so sorry. Sorry, Ruby. I read the book and loved the book, and I don't remember the name of it. But and
Well,
then we
yeah.
are scheduled for Vintage Books Live through the month of June. So we've got more. We're going to try to get those up on the website soon. I've gotten, it's been busy, and my kids graduated and various things happened, and so I have been neglecting the events page on the website, but we'll get that taken care of. So check that out in the next few days. We'll get the next few events. We've got a couple of author visits coming up in June. Portland Book Week is coming up June 10th through the 16th, I think. I'm pretty sure that every Clark County bookstore, or very nearly all of them, are participating in Portland Book Week. And then there's bookstores all across the Portland, Beaverton, Gresham, like the whole greater Portland area that are participating. There's going to be a bingo game with prizes, and it's going to be really fun. So be looking out for announcements for that. And thank you again to Jenn for joining us, and thank you to all of you who have watched gotten to this point. So
Yes.
have a good night and have a good week. And thank